do it step by step like a...
Well, good morning, everyone. I hope you had a great time last night at the Music Matters, which is always excellent. But yes, so today we're going to be talking about purpose in sport. So the last couple of days we've been hearing a lot about ESG in general, like a huge amount, and I think that's really significant in showing the demands of both shareholders and really ultimately fans and what they're looking for around sport, but around esports, around everything around marketing and digital. So in several countries, if you think about it, ESG and ESG reporting has become quite important in terms of corporations. In many cases, they're required as part of their filings with the government. And so ultimately, ESG is getting even more and more play. But really, when you think about it, an even deeper level of that is usually around purpose in sport because it involves youth or it involves the community. And so we're very lucky today to have two organizations here that at the core of their DNA is really purpose in sport. So it's really great. So join me today are, of course, Rebecca Dance-Shuker. She's the head of development for Laureus Sport for Good. She's got extensive experience working with Premier League teams and as well as the Olympics, amongst many, many others. Welcome, Becky. And then Daniel O'Connor, who is the Chief People Officer of ALBA Asia. He's got a lot of experience around sustainability and purpose and people. And as you may know, ALBA is an environmental services company that does a lot of work around recycling, and they're quite prominent in Asia. By the way, as well, congrats on the FIBA World Cup victory for Germany. Five of their players who either play for ALBA Berlin or have come through our academy were there, so we're going to hear a lot more about that shortly. So anyway, let's dive in. Okay, so the origin story of both your companies is really unique and interesting, and I think it tells a lot about how you've developed with purpose in sport, and in both cases, really started, you're going to put this last century or last millennium, actually. So you've been doing this for a long time. So Daniel, why don't you kick us off and tell us about the history of ALBA?
Sure, yeah, thanks, Lauren. Yeah, well, if you're anything like me, you're probably wondering, recycling, basketball, where's the connection? I know I was wondering when I first went for my first interview for this job, actually, and obviously I've learned a lot more about that since. And the story goes all the way back to 1991, so about 32 years ago. And it was quite serendipitous, and a meeting took place in a barber shop of all places in a place called Charlottenburg in Germany, in Berlin, and it was between the then owner and actually founder of ALBA Group and a barber. And the barber was talking away, as barbers do, about his treasured local basketball team and the risk it was under in terms of going into bankruptcy and the damage that would do to the fabric of the community within Charlottenburg. And being the entrepreneur that our founder was, of course, he saw and realized an opportunity in this. And thereafter, one thing led to another, and he decided to invest and embark on a partnership that's become one of the longest standing partnerships in sports in Germany, and still going. So 32 years later, here we are, owner of ALBA Berlin. So it went from a sports team on the verge of bankruptcy, really struggling, to what it is today, which is the largest and most successful basketball team in Germany. But of course, like with anything, it's not really about the end state, it's about the journey, and that's the piece that we're most proud of. And this is where I'll talk about how it links to recycling and come back to that. So first of all, just say a little bit about our purpose, given that's the topic of the subject in recycling. You know, we are a recycling company, we talk about waste management, but actually our vision is a world without waste. So you might say, well, why would a waste management company want a world without waste? Doesn't that mean you don't have a job anymore, right? But ultimately, we don't see ourselves as being in the business of simply disposing of waste and safely treating it. We talk about how do we close loops on raw materials, right? Where other people see waste, we see resource, and we have technologies that allow us to recreate value from that material, because that's all it is. It's material in a different format, right? So, and we do that in many different ways. So very much about closing the loop and very much about how do we sustain things over the long term. So the journey from 1991 basically involved a similarly long-term outlook where we invested in youth development, which at the time in the 90s was quite unusual and unconventional. You know, we were actually under a lot of criticism from the local media. We'd just taken over this team. We were struggling in the league, and of course there was a lot of pressure on, why don't you guys buy some decent players, try moving up the league, maybe get a promotion, right? Why are you spending all this money on schools? But we stuck with our strategy, and the pressure continued for a number of years until around, I think, 5 years later, we saw our under-15s team actually win the title in the under-15s league. The year after, the under-16s won the title in the under-16s league.
So some great development, and then you'll take us through in a little while just how you're doing that and affecting that locally as well, or how you brought that to Asia. Okay, Rebecca, thank you. So Rebecca, tell us about the early start of Laureus and where that came from. An amazing start, by the way.
Thanks. I'm not going to try and relay Nelson Mandela's speech, but he is very much the heart and soul of Laureus. Many of you probably know Laureus with the World Sports Awards. Back in May 2000, Nelson Mandela made a surprise visit to those awards and made his inaugural speech about the power of sport. And it's from there that Laureus Sport for Good and our purpose-led movement was created. We very much live by his words every single day in every part of our business. Sport does have the power to change the world. It creates hope where once there was only despair. And I mean, have a look on the website. The first thing that pops up is that speech. It was an athlete-led movement originally. That's very much where it started. On the stage that day in Monaco was Boris Becker, Edwin Moses, Nadia Comaneci, many athletes that were household names now. He took them into a room straight after that speech and said, "You have a job to do. Your job is to use your platform, to use your voice for social change." And that's where the Purpose Network was built. We now have over 330 Academy members and ambassadors. We still have the World Sports Awards, but the 365-day job for us is about sport for social change. It's using athletes' voice for good, and also raising funds to give back to underprivileged children all around the world. Today we have 300 programs in 50 countries, working with about 6.5 million young people. And obviously Nelson isn't here anymore, but his legacy will continue. People use his words in various different guises, in marketing material all around the world for sport, but and not many people know that it was born out of the Laureus World Sports Awards, and we're really proud of that, and we have a commitment to keep the movement going.
Okay, very good. Great intro and amazing history. I actually remember back then when that happened, and it was fantastic. Well, no, obviously Nelson Mandela as well inspired the entire South African team to win the World Cup as well, as you remember in the great film there. Okay, so you have all these programs. Take us through, and one of the purposes I always find it all that matters is how do you also share some of the knowledge and what you're doing. So take us through some of the different programs that you've done and that you run, because I think that'll be of real interest as people look at building their own programs.
I mean, it's a big question because we do so much. So I'll try and kind of put it into three pillars. So Sport for Good. Sport for Good is an international NGO. As I said, 300 programs in 50 countries. So we raise funds. We work with the UN. We're very much an expert around the table. We raise funds through corporates, very much through their either CSR, ESG, social impact strategies, and then we give that money back to NGOs all around the world. We have Laureus-owned programs, which is called our Sport for Good Cities program. When we talk about environment and sustainability, the world is changing, the weather is changing, we all know that. What's going to happen is migration to cities. So some of the most developing economies in the world, their cities are going to grow and grow and grow. They're not going to be able to cope. So we're working in those cities. An example is Delhi. I'm actually there in 2 weeks. where we raise funds, we give that back to the community, and they have the power to decide where that money goes based on the social issues. So it's a bottom-up approach. We have 8 of those cities around the world. We're trying to grow more of them. And then we have individual programs looking at gender justice, mental health and well-being, peace building in a lot of communities, social inclusion, bringing communities together, educational development and employability, so volunteering and mentoring. So we're very much using sport as a social change tool. It's not about the sport, it's about the social change that is created from that. So that's one pillar. The second pillar is our athlete-led movement and our purpose network. And our athletes do so much. They're all volunteers for us, and they give back their time. We use their platform and their voice for social change, and they celebrate, they tell the story. They are what creates our fans. They're very much who spread the message around what we do. And then we have our events and propositions, which is where the World Sports Awards sits. But one thing which we're doing with corporates, which we created in 2021, was the Sport for Good Index. And the Sport for Good Index is an annual event that calls out corporates around the world that are doing good and sport for, giving back to sport for good. Not just Laureus, but giving back. Patagonia is a really good example. Nike is a really good example. And we're about to go into our 3rd series of that. So everything is about sport for good and sport for social change, but our mechanisms of delivering that message is kind of really broad. But like I said, I could talk for a long time about all the things we're doing, but they're kind of the 3 main ones.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Yeah, so interesting how it's developed over time as well in the different pillars. So quite good. Okay, Daniel, actually you said it very well. The question I was going to ask you, like literally, how do you connect recycling and basketball? Because that is not two that may necessarily be linked, but take us through your programs and what you do around that. In Asia would be a great example.
Yeah, sure. Well, again, let me expand a little bit more on the topic of purpose. So in terms of our recycling business, how do we define our purpose? We break it down into 3 things. First and foremost, our purpose is to accelerate this region's journey towards a zero-waste environment. Okay, that's core to our business model, but it's not the only element of our purpose. The second aspect of it is how do we use our platform, how do we use our business as an opportunity to enable human beings to become the best that they can become, right? So we talk about how do we create a platform for human development, and we do that in many ways. And then the third aspect of our purpose is very important, which is how do we inspire the next generation, right? Because this is the most important generation. I think it was Benjamin Franklin that once said the investment in education pays the greatest interest, right? So if we really want to make a difference, we can do that through inspiring and changing the minds of young people. So how does that link to basketball? Well, within our values, we talk a lot about taking responsibility. Yeah, we're an organization that fundamentally takes responsibility for making a difference to the world around us, right? Through the technologies and the capabilities that we can deploy. And we think that actually any sports, but for us it's basketball, in order, at quite a philosophical level, in order to get better, in order to progress, right? We have to take responsibility first and foremost for ourselves, right? And that takes discipline, it takes commitment. You have to commit to actually turn up in the first place, right? Commit to train, commit to get better, commit to perform your best for your teammates, right? So at quite a fundamental level, it necessitates us all as individuals to take responsibility for improving oneself, right? And we believe that people who are able to develop a good level of mastery over that requirement go on to not only take responsibility for themselves, but also for the people around them, for their families, for their friends, for their teammates. And of course, if we do that at a relatively young age, those people go on to become not only good human beings, but good human beings that actually take some responsibility, not only for themselves, not only for their family, but for the world around them and for the environment, right? So we link together this idea of sports and taking responsibility for developing yourself with taking responsibility for the world around us and sustainability and making sure we protect that for the next generation.
And it's interesting because a lot of them are government. A lot of your clients are governments as well. So, and that would be requiring linking with them, which I'm sure they're they like to see that as well, and the activation, the sports.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we don't, when we talk about purpose, of course, there's a lot of cynicism around greenwashing, around sort of ESG marketing and so on, but I can say very, very genuinely, of course, financial sustainability is important for any organization, but it's not the reason for why we do what we do. However, there's a lot of interest from governments and our clients, and we actually incorporate what we do around social development in the communities in which we operate to our overall value proposition to our clients as well, right? So we don't see ESG as just a sort of tick box, meet the criteria, pass an audit type of activity. We see it as something of an opportunity to actually create more value by understanding within the local environment what are some of the social development issues in that country, and how can we use our capabilities not just in recycling but in basketball and in sports and the expertise we have around that to make a difference in that community based on what the needs are within that specific environment. And that actually forms part of our value proposition, in some cases part of the commercial contract with the government in terms of the requirements around education, social development.
Interesting. That's neat. Yeah, very, very interesting on that, and definitely a requirement, and it's becoming obviously more, especially if the governments are talking about the importance of having other corporates do it, they have to do it themselves. That's great. Okay. Well, with the increase, Rebecca, this is for you, with the increased focus on purpose in sport, what are some of the key trends you're seeing? And the second, that's kind of a two-part question. First one, what are the key trends you're seeing? And we had a great discussion about data and measurement. So if you can answer that in 2 parts, that'd be great.
Trends, I think, is young people voting with their feet, with their choice of where brands that they engage with. I think that's a big. I'm raising 2 boys, and they come home from school and tell me what I should and shouldn't be doing, what things I should be buying in the supermarket. You can't buy that, mummy, because that's not sustainable. They are, I think, they're our future, but they're also being educated much more around purpose and brands. And I think that's a big opportunity in terms of those brands then giving back. So I think the youth, I think sport is changing. I know we've just had the guys from badminton up here. I think traditional sport is moving on. I think, again, young people are looking at other faster paced, faster moving sports, maybe even urban sports. And from a Laureus perspective, although we're a sport organisation, we actually only you're specifically basketball. For us, it doesn't matter what sport. We're delivering surfing projects in Cape Town to skateboarding in Cambodia. So it's really different. In fact, we probably every year see a decrease in the amount of traditional sports, the footballs, the rugbies, and an increase in urban sports. And also the format of sport is changing. We're a charity partner for the Rugby Sevens in Hong Kong. It's a great format. It's fast-paced. It's really engaging for fans. So I think they're probably the 2 main ones and also just brands being more purpose-driven and wanting to give back. And that kind of leads on to your second question, is then when they give back, how do they know their money is going to the right place? How do they know what it's being spent on? ESG is an amazing mechanism for change, but I think there is something called social impact washing that's possibly, I don't even know if that's a word, I was talking to you about that on the phone, greenwashing, social impact washing. What is happening with that data? When these organisations are giving back to the community, how do they know what they're measuring? And is that money going to the right places, and is it changing the world for the better? There are so many mechanisms out there now, there's so much tech that can support that. I wouldn't say Laureus are very good at measuring data. We make sure we're showing return on investment for every single penny that we get given from governments, from federations, all the way through to corporates. But I don't think that's probably happening everywhere. And I think we need a regulation around it. I think environmental measurement is probably a little bit tangible and is much easier. To measure social impact is much harder, and I don't think we've got the answer to that yet. And I think, more needs to be done.
I think, and the other thing we talked a little bit about was organizations. And again, sports organizations, you think about in the last couple of years, have had a lot to deal with, obviously, with COVID, but also just the huge changes taking place in the entire sports industry, everything from media consumption to changing consumers in different formats. And we're seeing lots of new sports leagues, so lots of competition there. But I think one of the things you and I talked about as well is just is really sports organizations kind of adding that in and doing that. And you had early experience with the Premier League, but how do they manage that? And that's something I think where there's still a lot of room in terms of purpose in sport.
I mean, I'm a big fan. I worked in the Premier League for a long time, and I will only say positive things about what is happening in the club sector from years ago, not just today. Those clubs give back to their community. There is a massive connection of what investment do they get from their shirt sponsors all the way through to to all the sponsors that put money into a club, to that connection to the community. There is absolute synergy. And you can look at my LinkedIn on the clubs that I work for, and there's one that stands out. Fulham Football Club was amazing at that, and actually was a kind of a beacon of what other clubs in Europe wanted to follow. And that is happening, and that's not just happening in football, that's happening across all professional sport now. Probably more so in some countries than others. And I think the Premier League should be congratulated and celebrated it, because ESG wasn't around then. People weren't really focused on social impact. They've been doing it for years and years and years. I'd probably say they need to speed up and do more. But yeah, they're doing an amazing work, and so are basketball, so are rugby clubs. So yeah, I think that learning from what they've done over the years is something that we should all be taking on board.
Okay, very good. So you've got larger organizations that have been doing this. So the next question really to both of you again will be some tips for everyone here. And so it could start literally from what is your purpose around your business and where you started it, and what your values as you start the business, to how do you also implement a program. So can you take us through a little bit of that as well, Daniel?
Yeah, good question. I think first and foremost, an important self-reflection question for any organization is, what are your goals? And linked to that, how long do you want to be around, right? So is your outlook relatively short-term and you don't care what happens beyond 5 years? Or do you want to be around for the long term? Do you want to sustain yourself? Do you want to play in the so-called infinite game, right? Because if you look at how the lifespan of businesses have changed over the past 50 years, I saw some stats recently from McKinsey, I think, that said in 1958, the average lifespan of an S&P 500 organization was 61 years, so not bad. Today, it's less than 17 years, right? They predict that by 2027, 75% of the companies listed on the S&P 500 will have disappeared. They won't exist anymore, right? And for me, a big reason for that is due to short-termism, right? Due to the focus on meeting quarterly results and so on and so forth. For me, I think if you want to be around for the long term, organizations need to really ask themselves, what are they doing to contribute to the ecosystem of which they form a part of, right? What's their net positive contribution, right? Of course, as I mentioned earlier, financial sustainability is important. That's the fuel for further growth. That's the fuel for creating further impact. But ultimately, if you're extracting financial capital at the expense of environmental or social capital from the world around you, eventually the environment will dispose of you, right? Because you're not creating value for it. So it's very short-termist to say, oh, well, we can't measure that, or we can't see how that's going to help promote our brand, or we can't see how that's going to help our P&L over the next 12 months, so we're not going to do it, right? Maybe that decision will work for the next 12 months, but I'd argue it might not for the next 12 years. So you really need to think about what is core to you, what is the basis for your business model, and how are you going to use that to create positive change in the world around you, because you need the ecosystem to continue to perpetuate just as much as the communities and the environment around you, because you are a part of it as well. So a long-winded answer. I would also just circle back around on the measurement piece. I know it came up in the last panelist discussion. it is always a difficult question to ask, of course, because anything sustainability related involves the long term, right? And the longer you go out, the harder it is to put a number on it. But we like numbers in business, of course, so we try our best. One of the things we've done in asking ourselves that question, you know, we think we're having a positive impact. We have 10,000 youths involved in our youth development program today. But we said, what impact is that really having, and how are we going to measure that going forward? And the way in which we did it is we said, okay, what are we trying to achieve here? We're actually trying to get young people to move, right? On the basis that movement generates lots of positive things in terms of physical development, but also mental health development, with a particular focus on underprivileged and deprived areas. So then we said, okay, if that's the goal, why don't we measure movement hours? So last year we calculated for the first time through our youth development programs, we've delivered 25,000 movement hours to young people across the world, which equates to, for the mathematicians in the room, about 3 years of someone's time, 24 hours, day and night, where young people are moving, as opposed to maybe sitting in their rooms playing on video games, or maybe something even worse, getting involved in antisocial activities and such like, but actually instead they're involved in something positive that's doing themselves some good, but also equipping them with some really important life skills like teamwork and self-discipline.
Okay, very good. Rebecca?
I kind of totally agree. I think long-term strategic investment is absolutely critical. If we want to see change, environmental change, social change, it's not going to happen overnight. I think we don't celebrate all the good that is being done. I think the sports sector, it's a big sector. It's relatively fragmented. I don't know whether I always believe that people are working together that well. I think collaboration is happening, but it's not celebrated in a way. It's more competitive. People want to just talk about their brands and what they're doing rather than talking about the collective. And I've just moved to the Middle East, and it's an amazing country it is to live in. There's a lot of silo work happening, and I've just been asked to join set up a sport and business group. And the first thing I said was, well, if we're going to do something and we're going to make a change, then we actually will have to work it together to make a change. I'm not going to sit around this table and do things in silo. So I'm all for strategic investment, long-term investment. Don't just think about 2024. And if your CEO changes, if your board changes, it should be written in the roots of your business that you are doing this environmental and social change for forever. It can be quite emotionally led, this work, whether somebody has a real passion for a certain specific social or environmental cause, great, but it shouldn't be done on emotional, personal interest. It should be part of your business's DNA. And collaborative working, I think we need to do more of it. And competition, profit, the bottom line, I get it. That is really important for businesses. But when you you step away from that, working together to create change and do it in a joined up manner shouldn't be competitive. We should all be celebrating that together.
So really both from an industry perspective and then as well also the future executives in the sports industry. And it's one thing that JB, my business partner, and I are very passionate about is how do we help the next generation continue to grow. So this could be definitely another topic area and one that they immediately identify with. So it's great. Any final thoughts, either of you? It's been very good, by the way. Good panel.
Just a further expansion on your last question in terms of, where should you start, if you're asking in terms of advice for other organizations. Of course, lots of organizations are doing a lot of good things and are very much involved in community investments and volunteer groups and so on and so forth. But I would say in terms of impact, what's most important is that we think about materiality. Right, meaning what do we do and what's special about us as an organization? What are our capabilities? What are we strong at? that will enable us to make the biggest possible difference within the environment and the communities in which we operate. So we don't just do randomized activities because they're good. I'm not saying stop doing that. What I am saying, if you really want to leverage impact, think about how you leverage what's core to you and what your strengths are first and foremost, and then drive into that.
Very good. Very much from a strategic level. And Becky?
I think just, championing and that we all can be a force for good, and make sure you challenge what your company, what your organisation, what your friends are doing around environmental and social impact. Make sure it's a conversation around the dinner table, and challenge the norm, because the world isn't going to change for the better if we don't start challenging some of the old ways of doing things. So be your own champion, be a force for good, and make sure you get out of bed every day and make a difference.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you for a great panel. We heard about a new index. You got to like that. And Becky came up with a new word, so I like that. Oh, yeah, so that's good. But no, ultimately, I mean, the sport, we all know, and we're all here because we love sports, and we know the power of sports. And I think this is, in many ways, as much as you've got older organizations that are steeped in history, there's still lots of purpose, lots of opportunity to grow purpose in sport and understand why purpose in sport matters. So thank you very much. Great panel, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.